All right, class is in session here in Hall 101 at the virtual campus of the Apartment Academy, the multifamily industry's only operations-focused podcast and your institute for higher NOI. I'm the Dean of the Apartment Academy, your host, Daniel Cunningham, and today is we're going to geek out a little bit about IoT devices and water and intrusion sensors and the like with John Riggs, who is CTO and head of the Applied Technology Solutions for HSB. John and I had a chat about their Meshify device and what it means to reducing risk at apartment buildings in terms of water and temperature sensors. And it's an industry that's really just starting to bloom within multifamily, but I think is going to be critical for anybody to have installed as soon as they possibly can to help avoid some of the things that happened, like in Houston when there was the freeze a couple years ago. So listen up, because you're going to learn something today. Here is Professor Riggs. Welcome to our virtual lecture hall here at the Apartment Academy, Professor Riggs. Great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thank you, Daniel.
So I wanted to kind of just sort of kick things off because I was wondering, you are Senior VP of Applied Technology at HSB, a company, a subsidiary of the largest reinsurer, or one of the largest reinsurers in the world. Maybe they're the largest. More well known for equipment insurance, right, than IoT devices. But we're talking about IoT devices today. So if you mind, just kind of kick things off by talking to us a little bit about, how it is that HSB came to be involved in IoT devices, the Meshify product in general, how that came to be.
Appreciate that, Daniel. And just recently, in the past few months, there was an addition to my title that was a real humbling experience for me and quite an honor. I became the Chief Technology Officer of HSB and the SVP of Applied Technology Solutions. And the reason why that's actually germane to our discussion is earning that title was in part HSB wanting to make sure that they put an underline and a highlight and a bold on technology, that it was critical to the business going forward. It didn't effectively change the scope of my role or my responsibilities, but it further amplified the criticality of emerging tech as something that could be applied to help our clients and our end insureds mitigate perils. So you asked about the journey of HSB. It starts back in 2013, 2014 as it pertains to IoT. And it was a recognition by our CEO, Greg Baratz, that in the world of equipment breakdown, we are, as a specialty insurer, trying to make sure that that equipment stays up and running, first and foremost. We're more in the business of business continuity and consistency in the performance of the assets that our end insureds rely upon every day in terms of their operations. And that's Main Street, that's light manufacturing, it's multifamily, it's assets in many different spaces. And so with that, many of those assets, the direction that they're going is to embed technology within them, to become connected. There is a belief held very dear by my boss, Greg Baratz, that if we didn't get ahead of that technological curve, of that sensor technology being embedded in the asset, we would risk being disintermediated in our equipment breakdown specialty insurance space. The equipment would be connected, it would be effectively maintained, the longevity of the equipment, the performance of the equipment would be supported by the OEMs themselves. And they would be able to monitor the maintenance, the equipment condition, and over time, they would be able to predict the need for additional maintenance or attention to that asset to avoid the breakdown. And so that's where the study began in terms of emerging tech. And very shortly thereafter, there was a recognition that, hold on, if you're looking at providing sensor technology to major assets, to vessels under pressure, HVAC systems, boilers, you name it, pumps, motors. There's also the idea of applying sensors to mitigate other perils. Water presence sensors, water detection sensors, temperature sensors, to mitigate things like water damage and freeze damage. And you also can apply sensors from our ecosystem players that can mitigate perils like fire and can keep an eye out for electrical arcing. And so what started as an equipment breakdown journey quickly encompassed the perils that our client companies face each and every day.
And John, we often think of multifamily as being sort of laggards in adopting technology. What has been the response, the adoption rate of these kinds of sensors within multifamily?
I think I'll answer that in two ways, Daniel. First and foremost, the platform and the offering that we provide in terms of a monitoring service, a platform type service for leak and freeze and fire. We do that across 20 different occupancies, and it includes multifamily. I would say on the whole, I wouldn't call out multifamily as being a laggard with the adoption of IoT to mitigate perils. I would say they're with, in general, the rest of the community, possibly the commercial business environments that depend more on critical assets, whether that be industrial pumps or motors or industrial chillers. I believe that they have adopted the technology more readily because the equipment itself is more prone to having sensors embedded within it. But when you talk about sensors being applied to legacy environments, we're seeing right now that in terms of the innovator's dilemma model, the Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm framework of early innovators, technology enthusiasts, to early majority, to late majority. We're somewhere right at the pivot point from the technology enthusiasts to the early adopters, the early majority. And the wind feels like it's definitely at our backs right now. We're seeing program after program after program, some of which includes multifamily environments within their book of insurance. We're seeing client company after client company go to scale. And for us, that's thousands upon thousands of devices being deployed until we deem the program at scale. And it feels like every other month I've got another program that's going to scale. So we're right at that growth point. I think with multifamily, if there is any lag, it's simply because the core operations of multifamily aren't depending on a particular asset that's very prone to having this sensor technology applied. And that area or that environment has been more accustomed to applying the type of infrastructure, the type of equipment you and I have in our homes each and every day, but maybe on a greater scale with a multifamily environment. Whereas other environments, commercial environments that maybe have ovens or maybe have commercial grade freezers or refrigerators, they've been more prone to some of that advanced technology being applied to their business.
With the let's given that the academy, the enrolled student body here at the academy tend to be on-site operators, would you mind just sort of stepping back for a moment and sort of explaining exactly what it means to have a water intrusion device, a temperature sensor device, what's actually happening, what are the advantages of having those in place, and what risks are you mitigating once you have those in place?
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the technology itself. We have effectively two categories of sensors that we deploy. One is a leak freeze sensor that is not plugged in to any local power. It is battery operated. It does not rely on a gateway, but it's a cellular leak freeze sensor, and it connects to the LTE-M network and is able to monitor the property for freezing conditions as well as the presence of water. So for leakage and potentially water peril. The other classification of sensors is LoRaWAN technology, LoRa-based technology. It's a long-range, low-power type of technology that requires a gateway. It's better for applications where maybe you have a cinder block construction and you have coverage issues. You have issues with signal getting in and out of the occupancy. And so in those applications, we use the gateway with the LoRa sensors. Where we have coverage from cellular, we're able to use the leak freeze sensors and not need that gateway. So that's a little bit about the two types of offerings that we provide. In both cases, they're not dependent on AC. Because if there's a power outage with the gateway on the LoRa side, there's a battery backup. So in the case of an electrical outage, that system still continues to monitor for freeze conditions and the presence of water. On the cellular leak freeze, it is not dependent on any local power or electrical supply other than the battery that it contains. So it also continues to stay fully functional in the case of weather events or electrical outages. So that's a bit about what the two offerings do. But in terms of their actual application, the sensors themselves are monitoring for temperature changes. They're monitoring for freeze conditions. They're sensing the ambient temperature, and with the application of certain temperature sensors to pipes, they're measuring the temperature of the pipe itself. And we're trying to mitigate freeze conditions, because if the pipe freezes, it's prone to bursting or joints become broken, and there's water that leaks from the system. In terms of fire peril, in that case, we're working with a partner, Whisker Labs, to deploy an intelligent voltmeter that's looking for electrical arcing and can detect arcing, which is one of the primary causes of electrical driven fires. And it helps to do early detection of those arcing events before any damage occurs. In terms of how the platform functions, you have the sensors, and they have probes that are looking for water that's effectively bridging a gap on the probes. And with that, they detect the presence of water. And an alert is provided, and it goes through our IoT stack with our cloud services provider, and with the platform itself issues an alert that there's a risk and it needs to be checked. So the service manager, the operations manager, the property manager, you can actually designate whoever it is that you would like to have those notifications, and they can have a myriad of types of notification. They can have notification on the app, the Protect app that we have, the Meshify Protect app. They can also have text alerts, and then we escalate it beyond that, where if there's not a confirmation that you've received the alert and that you're taking action, it will get escalated to a phone call being made to whomever you designate, and it can be more than one phone number, but whomever you designate should receive that notification. So it follows a escalation hierarchy so that the peril is not ignored.
I want to draw attention to one of the things you said, because I think most folks in multifamily, when they think about IoT devices, interconnect devices, I think they're thinking about access control, and a lot of access control devices require Wi-Fi coverage, and that's sort of a pain and an expensive one at that. You made 2 points that might be missed. One is that it can work right off the cellular if that's present, but the other one is that it uses LoRaWAN. And LoRaWAN, if you try to get LoRaWAN coverage, it's much different than trying to get Wi-Fi coverage because it's a lower frequency, doesn't require as many gateways to do that. You want to just talk briefly just about the dynamics of installing getting LoRaWAN coverage. I think I know this is not an expensive prospect, but would you want to address that real quick?
Sure. So in the cases where we look for coverage in an environment, and we prefer to go with the cellular leak freeze option in the event that we expect that there are not going to be coverage issues. It provides an easier customer experience because, as you even mentioned, Daniel, the gateway is not necessary. So you just put them in place and you activate them and you're good to go. And your activation, your process of doing that, you're guided through that with Protect. Same situation with LoRa, except it requires a LoRa gateway. And you're still guided by Protect, but there is the gateway device that has to be plugged in and has to be set up and then connected to those LoRa sensors. It's an excellent alternative, an excellent solution to deploy. And I think in most multifamily environments, it's the more appropriate solution because of the construction, because of coverage issues, potential coverage issues with an LTE-M signal. And when you don't have the coverage, the reason why that's germane is if your radio struggles to receive and send signals, it's draining the battery. It needs a strong signal to sustain battery life. And if it doesn't have that strong cellular network in the environment or that strong coverage by cellular, your battery life is going to be negatively impacted. With a LoRa gateway, you can ensure that you have the coverage that you need because your gateway is right there. It's on-prem with the rest of the LoRa devices. So you set up that gateway, you begin deploying your LoRa sensors, they connect with the gateway, and the battery life of the LoRa sensors is thereby positively impacted because it's within close proximity of that gateway. And again, it's while it is maybe 1 degree more complicated in terms of that installation, depending on the occupancy, depending on the multifamily setting, we provide on-site support, professional install when necessary, to ensure that you're getting the best coverage, the best placement of the sensors, and that everything is working as the system should work. So there are alternatives depending on the scenarios that we face. And we really do need that flexibility with the different types of challenges that we face across 20 different occupancies.
So can you talk about the economics of it a little bit? I know there's different ways to deploy this. You could have a water leak sensor in every single unit in a community, or you can have them just in certain critical key areas. Let's talk about the most common scenarios that these under which these sensors are deployed, and what the cost, broadly speaking, might be to cover a community of 200 units.
So, in each of these situations, you have to have some assessment of the property, and you can have discussions with the client company because they know the risk that is implied with that location. They have a loss history. And so in terms of how you decide how many sensors, where to deploy the sensors, much of that typically for us is driven by interactions with the insurance company, the client company that's providing that property coverage to the commercial property, to the multifamily. And it also impacts the economics because in some cases that cost is passed on to the end insured, and in other cases the client company is recognizing the loss avoidance that the sensors can bring and making decisions about where to apply the sensors based on a perception of the ROI. And we've done a ton of analysis looking at our top 10 accounts for 2021, and we're continuing to run this analysis in 2022. And we've seen ROI calculations for the cost of the sensors and the scenarios where it's a LoRa sensor plus gateway. We've done the math for both types of sensors that I outlined before, the cellular leak freeze and the LoRa sensor product. And the ROI ranges from 300% to 1,500%. Across those 10, we ran an average, and that's multiple occupancies, both sensor types. The average ROI is 506% across those 10 top accounts. And those accounts are accounts at scale. They are our most significant, largest accounts. And so statistically, the results are extremely valid and very representative. The cost itself, I won't get into details of the cost per sensor or the cost per gateway here today, but it is managed as a subscription model. So it's a service model. And it's a fee per month, per sensor. And the pricing of it depends on the application, depends on the account, depends on the occupancy. So we look at all of those different conditions, and we have a range of pricing in terms of how much that is for the cellular leak freeze versus the LoRa. The price points are similar, a little bit more expense related to needing to have that gateway, but since it is a subscription model, the pricing is very similar.
Is that a competitive differentiator for you, John? The license subscription model, or is that common in providers of equipment like this?
I would say that a subscription model is common. You will see our competitors experimenting with multiple models. You'll see them charging for the equipment and having a lower monitoring fee. You'll see other cases where there's no charge for the equipment and a slightly higher monitoring fee. And those are the levers on a business model like this. I would say the subscription model is not a differentiator in and of itself. That's more or less table stakes, I would say now, in terms of commercial and personal lines, IoT monitoring services. What's a real differentiator for us, and I'm glad you mentioned this earlier, Daniel, Wi-Fi. So with us, Wi-Fi can often be a challenge. It can be an issue because in some commercial environments, they do not want you to get on their Wi-Fi network, whether it's a hospital environment or a multifamily or an education environment. They in many cases don't want you on that corporate network, so to speak. But our system doesn't rely on Wi-Fi. And so we are able to circumvent the Wi-Fi related issues. But what's even more exciting for us is it also makes the entire system much less vulnerable in terms of any type of cyber threat.
Got it. Is there anything from a other than the Wi-Fi angle? Is there anything else that differentiates the Meshify product in terms of its applicability or effectiveness from some of the other some of the other offerings that are out there? Help our audience understand, how do you weigh which kind of product you should be looking at or what you should watch out for?
I would say this. I would say because we are not an insurtech, a startup, sitting outside in a typical startup fashion of 10, 20, 30 people slogging it every day and going where the next opportunity is to keep the lights on, so to speak. Anyone who's operated in a startup environment can appreciate that mindset, and it's appropriate. In our case, being within HSB, it affords us the ability to focus on the perils and to focus on the platform with the insurance lens. And so there is a level of quality there. There's a level of consistency there. There's a level of service that is simply expected in the insurance community, in the insurance sector. So, and we also have a very keen understanding of the insurance aspect of an occupancy, of the inherent risks that one occupancy has versus another, of a water peril or freeze peril in one occupancy versus another. So we have, not by accident, aligned our business and aligned our platform and aligned our value propositions much more so to the insurance community, the client companies that we serve. We have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of contracts with those client companies to bring this platform to their end insureds. And when you do it through the client companies, through the insurance companies, it definitely provides a deeper understanding of what the value is of the saves, the economic value of the saves that our system provides. And we're able to look at that across a book of business for the insurance companies and compare where IoT was present and losses were avoided versus where it was not. And so that understanding of the insurance world, I think it's probably our biggest differentiator.
And did I understand you right, John? Is this, that relationship has allowed some of your clients to procure the MeshFi system through their carrier, and it's subsidized by the carrier? Is that what you were implying earlier? That maybe the license fee is not even paid by the local client?
Correct. So the client companies, they look at their book of business, and they look at the losses, and they look at the loss history and the claims data, and we see a range of economic models that they choose to pursue. In some cases, those costs are passed along to the end insured. In some cases, they're shared with the end insured and the insurance company, the client company, as I said. They're underwriting that expense. In some cases, the client companies are carrying that expense. It depends on the book of business. It depends on the loss history. And it depends on the problems they're trying to solve.
Amazing. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. You've got a 500% or better ROI. You might be covered by your insurance carrier. I'm not sure what's holding people up. What are the headwinds here, John, in terms of getting adoption?
That is the question that I think about more than any other question. If you've got a platform that's got 500% ROI, I've got 8 sensors in my own home. I can't imagine not having those 8 sensors. I can't imagine being away from my home or wondering if the low freeze conditions that can sweep across the nation are impacting my pipes or the safety of my home. You would think it's a no-brainer. But at the end of the day, you still have to have an end insured, whether it's a multifamily or whether it's a commercial mom and pop on Main Street, or whether it's a light manufacturing environment, whatever that range is of occupancy, there's still an owner of that business or an owner of that building that needs to make the decision to opt in. What you typically don't find is client companies forcing it down anyone's throat. And we wouldn't want that either, because that wouldn't result in a good customer experience. We want a great customer experience. So there is an enrollment that's required. And I think it's kind of like anything else. It's what slows change in almost every case. And it's that in order to embrace that change, you have to do something. You have to be willing to set aside some time. And again, I try to relate things to personal anecdotes. I myself probably should have had Wi-Fi cameras monitoring my property 5 years before I did. And then even when I bought them, they sat on my kitchen counter for 6 months before I finally installed them. It's no different. It's the same challenge that you face. And once they're up and running and people have the app and they're monitoring, they say the same thing I say. How did I ever live without this? But there's still a leap that has to be taken to get there.
Yes, they've got to cross the chasm, John. Why don't we wrap up and talk a little bit about the future, where these are headed? Like, for example, I heard at the conference I was at that some of these devices are adding shutoff valves, water shutoff valves. That's being a feature that's coming out. Anything like that, John, that is on the horizon for these kinds of devices, new types of sensors, new functionality?
Absolutely. I'm super excited about everything that we have in our pipeline right now, and our pipeline is healthy, and the front end of it is full, and we're working with multiple ecosystem providers, and I'm really proud of the fact that we don't suffer from NIH, not invented here. We don't have to make every sensor. We don't have to design every component of our solution set. And so a couple of things. One, I think about it as a bundle of offerings. And today it's leak, it's freeze, it's fire, it's perishable goods, refrigeration, ammonia detection, and equipment breakdown as well. And that cuts across some of the perils I just mentioned. But we view it as a continuation. We continue to build. So you have a great sensor technology like the LoRa sensors. We have our next generation LoRa sensors that'll be coming out in 2023 with some features we're super excited about. But those sensors also unlock new use cases for us. New refrigeration perils, perishable goods perils, new equipment breakdown perils. The water shutoff you mentioned, that LoRa sensor can talk to a water shutoff and say, I see water here, and the water shutoff can shut it off for the entire property. And until there's a chance to check it out and see what's happened. If somebody kicked over a bucket and everything's fine, okay, I can reverse the water shutoff, but at least I knew. Or is there a coupling that's broken, or some type of pipe that's burst, and the water shutoff can take care of that without any damage occurring. So we've started out in the beginning of monitoring, and so it's detection of peril, and we've evolved to the point where we can now predict based on things that we see. We can see the temperature changing. We can predict that freeze conditions might occur. We can predict that mold conditions might occur. And to the final phase of ACT, and ACT is water shutoff. So I think this entire realm of connect and protect, predict and prevent, these are the phrases that we use. We're seeing a continual evolution of that by adding additional capabilities. Fire pumps is another area for a multifamily. And being able to manage or monitor the maintenance of fire pumps, that's how you make sure they're up and running and ready when the emergency occurs. And then on the sensor side, we're looking at many different types of sensors. We're looking at fabric sensors, flat sensors, tape sensors, optical sensors that can help us monitor the occupancy of a building. So sensors related to occupancy, batteryless sensors, you name it. We're looking at it and evaluating it to see what can provide the biggest bang for the buck for our client companies and our end insureds.
For those listening that are interested in learning more about installing these kinds of devices at their community, John, where do they reach out? Are they buying the Mesh5 product through HSB directly? Are there resellers? How do they find out more about what it takes to get this installed?
Typically, we work through a myriad of distribution channels. In some cases, they can interact with a company like Leo as a distribution channel, an alternate distribution channel for us. In other cases, they're interacting with a broker or an agent of insurance, and they're able to get access to the service through their insurance provider. So many different opportunities to take advantage. And by all means, you can also go to our Meshify website, our HSB Sensor Solutions splashdown as well within the HSB website to learn more.
Well, thank you, John, for geeking out with us a little bit about the technology you guys have developed over there. Really important risk mitigation aspect I don't think enough people understand yet in the multifamily industry. So really pleased to see it taking hold. Thank you for sharing some of your time with us today. Appreciate it.
Daniel, my pleasure. Nice talking with you.
Thank you for joining us at this week's episode of the Apartment Academy podcast. The Apartment Academy is a production of Leonardo247, the industry's leader in multifamily operations and maintenance software. At Apartment Academy, we realize the hard work that goes into property management and the stress that comes along with it. Leonardo247 takes the guesswork out of your team's day-to-day by providing customized daily guidance on tasks that need to be done, guaranteeing consistent operations across your entire portfolio. To learn more, visit www.leonardo247.com today.